All right, so joining us today is Ian Stirsman, the current master distiller for all Ross and Squibb brands. And correct me if I'm wrong on any of this intro, Ian, please. So including things like George Remus, which we will get to in a minute. I'm really excited to talk about that. Other things, I guess, like what Rossville Union Rye too. Since 2014, Ian's worked in a variety of roles at MGP. And before earning your master distiller certification, or what did you get in 2019? Is that right?
hmm
So prior to joining MGP, you worked as a process manager, according to my research, and a shift manager for global manufacturing and engineered materials. You graduated in 2010 from Ohio University with a Bachelor of Science in Chemical Engineering and a minor, of course, in Biological Science. The smart Ian Sturzman, welcome to the show. How you doing, sir?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. So here you just got married, so congratulations on that.
Thank you. Yeah, it was just this Saturday, so
Just this,
it was a good weekend. Busy weekend, but a good weekend.
where did you guys end up getting married at?
We just got married at my wife now. I haven't said that very much yet. My wife's family has a little property down on the Ohio River, where we all kind of go hang out on the weekends together, and we just got married down there. So it was a lot of fun.
Nice. So I can't thank you enough for doing this. I don't know if you remember, I'm sure you probably talked to a lot of people, but very, very, very early on in this channel's history, I think it was we had like 200, 300 subscribers at the time, very early on. We did a review of the Gatsby Reserve and you commented on that video. I don't know if you remember that.
I do.
You do
Yeah.
remember that. Okay, so we were
Mhm.
talking about the low proof of the 15 year, and to my surprise, Mr. Ian hops in there and gives this whole, now I know how smart you are, I understand now. You give this whole paragraph of why the proofing, the cause of it and all this stuff, and answered all of our questions scientifically, which was great. So I reached out to him and asked him if he wouldn't mind coming on the show. We could ask him a couple questions. He graciously accepted. So here we are. So I appreciate it, Ian.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for the review of the Gatsby. It was a good one. Thanks.
Yeah. So okay. So for those of you guys who aren't older Whiskey Wisdom fans, if you go back on the channel, this bottle beat out. So my top bottle was the Four Gate Split Stay for the longest time, and this bottle beat that out. I was really surprised. That was a top running bottle for quite a while, and I don't know if you can see, but this bottle continues to be one of my favorites. I don't know if you can see that. It's almost gone now, unfortunately. Okay, so can you share more about your transition from becoming like a process manager at a paper mill to a master distiller in the whiskey industry?
Yeah, I mean, it was an easy decision transition, but I graduated in 2010. I was a chemical engineer, and the first interview I had right when I graduated was at a paper mill to be a process engineer at a paper mill. So I got that interview and I took the job, and it was a great place to start my career. The paper making process is really interesting. You learn a lot really quickly in it. There's a lot of great people at that facility to learn from, but just all the products we made were kind of declining in use. So we made envelope paper, and people are sending more emails. We made book paper, and people are using e-readers. So kind of all the things we made were declining in use. It didn't seem like a really sustainable career for the long term. And also, paper mills are just kind of big, smelly, hot, nasty places. They don't usually put them down in the middle of metropolitan areas. They usually put them, way out in the boonies. And I kind of wanted to live a little closer to civilization. So I started looking around for jobs a little bit. I was specifically kind of looking at Cincinnati because a lot of friends and family there. It was close to where I grew up. And just by happenstance, a recruiter reached out to me from the distillery in Lawrenceburg, which I'd never heard of at the time, and about a ship manager job. And I thought, I hadn't really thought about making whiskey or ever even really been into whiskey at the time. I did brew beer in college and thought it'd be cool to work at a brewery, but never thought about the kind of option of working at a distillery. But it sounded cool, so I took the opportunity, and I couldn't be more happy that I did because I fell in love with it right away. I fell in love with the distillery, the process, as well as the whiskeys that we make pretty much immediately. So so I'm glad I made the transition.
Yeah, absolutely. I used to work at a technology company really, really long time ago, and they split into like digital and paper because same reason paper is declining. And I don't know if it was the same for you, but not only is that smell you're talking about there, but it was incredibly loud in the factory. We had to wear earphones in there. I don't know if it was the same for you, but okay. So you
Mhm.
mentioned that you enjoy homebrewing your own beer. So I guess we can segue right into that question. How has your personal interest in brewing and maintaining a whiskey bar at home influenced your career and approach to whiskey production?
So honestly, my my homebrewing hobby kind of ended shortly after college.
Okay.
We had a homebrew group that we were in college, but then ever since I got the job at the distillery and started doing it as a profession, I really haven't done much homebrewing anymore. But as far as the part about maintaining a whiskey collection at home and being into it, I think that influences me a lot just because I think it's good to see what other people are doing in the industry. We don't like to copy people. We like to be leaders, not followers, but it's good to learn, from what other people are doing. And it's also good to kind of be in the whiskey community, right? Because as I interact with people in the community, it's good to be able to speak the language, to kind of keep up on the trends. Again, our distillery is one of the oldest around. We've been doing it for a very long time. We're not going to chase fads, but it is good to know kind of what the trends are in the industry and be able to speak the language with the people out there in the community because it is kind of two separate languages, like the language we speak in the distillery and making whiskey, and then the language out there kind of in the whiskey community. So it's good to know both.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So tell everybody like what does like a typical day of your job look like at the distillery?
So the first thing I do every morning, usually we have a morning meeting. So the engineers responsible for each different part of the distillery will report out on kind of what's happening in each different part of the distillery, what the challenges are for the day. We'll kind of go over the plan for the day. Um, Then after that, I'll go over to the sensory lab. We'll do sensory analysis on all of the product tanks, the previous day's distillates, to decide whether or not we're going to barrel those distillates. Then after that, it can be a lot of different things. I might be working with our master blender on some new product innovation, kind of looking at how different lots of barrels are aging, what we might be able to do with those barrels in the future. I might be working with our brand managers to, talk about what are we going to lay down this year that might be interesting in the future, or it might be helping our technical team if there's serious problems out in the distillery, if there's complex problems out in the distillery, helping them overcome those. Or it might be out talking to consumers or talking to people like yourself, kind of educating consumers, talking to people out in the community. So it could be a lot of different things. There's no typical day, which I enjoy.
A man of many hats, I assume.
Hmm.
So, okay, let's go on with that sensory process you were talking about. I assume this is probably contributes highly to the maintaining the quality of the whiskey. Can you maybe kind of outline what that sensory process looks like that you mentioned, like including, I don't know, standards of your flavor profiles and defect identification, things like that?
Yeah, so one thing that's really unique about our distillery is I don't know of another distillery our size or really anywhere near our size that also makes GNS. So when we talk about GNS, or some people say NGS, neutral grain spirits or grain neutral spirits, basically vodka. Um, but we make a lot of GNS, and that gives us an ability to where we don't have to barrel all the whiskey we make. If we make whiskey that we don't think is going to turn out good in the barrel, we just won't barrel it, and we'll strip all the flavor congeners out of it. We'll distill it up, to 193 proof to the azeotrope, and turn it into grain neutral spirits. So there's not another distillery really I know of with that ability, but because of that, every morning we will do sensory analysis on all of the distillates we made the previous day. So we have a standard for each mash bill of kind of what we think it should smell and taste like before it goes into the barrel. And we'll compare that to that standard. If the deviation is too big from the standard, then we'll turn that whiskey into GNS and move on. And we don't like to do that. We try to make good whiskey all the time, so we don't have to destroy it into vodka. But but because of that, yeah, we train. We have a whole team that does sensory analysis. We train on picking up certain defects. There's certain defects people pick up really well, and others don't, like must. Some people have a really hard time smelling must. Some people are really sensitive to it. Butyric acid's another one. Some people are very sensitive to it. Some people can't really smell it. So we train on how to pick up those defects at different concentrations, and then we evaluate all of those samples in the morning to make sure that everything we're barreling is going to turn out to be good whiskey.
Okay. How have your or do you feel like your engineering skills have they been beneficial in your journey to becoming like a master distiller? And do you leverage like those skills in your current role?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a little bit of a misconception about chemical engineers. That I think people think there's a lot more chemistry involved. It's really about like managing big fluid processes. So it's about fluid dynamics, moving fluid. It's about heat transfer and thermodynamics. And there is some chemistry involved with reactions, reactors like bioreactors, like fermenters. So it's basically all the stuff that goes on in a distillery. So it's good to learn all the fundamentals and the reasons why, before you go into working at a distillery. But then, once you go in, it's really all learning on the job and how to apply those fundamentals to what you're doing. But I think the other part of that is it's really good to learn how to think like an engineer when it comes to making whiskey, because um, you really need to be really analytical and data driven, especially because when you evaluate quality for whiskey, like there's no instrument to do that, right? The instrument is humans. It's a human instrument, and it's an imperfect instrument. So it's really important to think like an engineer and to remove all those anecdotal observations and biases, to make that human instrument as accurate as possible so that you have good data to make the best whiskey possible.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's no like Walter White Heisenberg stuff going on behind the scenes like maybe a lot of people think.
No, no.
Okay, so patience, right? Huge aspect or huge part of this process in the whiskey making process. Can you discuss like the importance of patience and how do you guys manage the anticipation of that, waiting for whiskey to mature?
Yeah, patience is probably like the hardest part of this job, because you get ideas, for new innovations, and you get excited about them, and then you make them, and then you just have to wait. And it's a big part of my job working with our master blender to kind of determine, when is each whiskey going to be its best, right? And you don't know how long you have to wait for that. And it's hard to not let your biases of being excited and wanting to get it out there on the market influence that decision of when it's ready and when it should go to the market.
Yeah, fair enough. Can you maybe tell us what's like the most fun project or innovative thing that you've worked on there so far? Something that you were excited about?
Every year the repeal reserve is always a ton of fun. We get to kind of free reign of the warehouses and come up with something, unique and cool every year. Um, the new Remus Highest Rye,
Okay.
was really fun. It was a new mash bill that nobody's ever really seen from us before. We did have it in our single barrel program for Remus the last couple of years. But for the most part, people didn't really know what mash bill they were picking because we just started putting the mash bill on the label for the most recent single barrels. But um, but yeah, it's a mash bill from our distillery that nobody's ever seen. It's like the highest rye a bourbon can be. It's the first bourbon that we've made with malted rye. So there's a lot of cool things on that was really exciting.
Okay. So finally, you mentioned that making whiskey is about helping people connect with each other. We were talking about that a little bit earlier. Can you elaborate on this aspect and share how your work contributes to fostering connections among whiskey enthusiasts? I have my answer, but I'm curious to hear yours.
Yeah, I think just like I think that having people over and cooking for them and sharing great food and sharing great drinks with them is just it's how we connect on like a you're serving someone else's like primal need, right? Like we need to eat to survive, right? So I
Right.
think there's something in our DNA that's like how we connect.
Yeah.
So it's like the definition of hospitality. So it just feels good to have people over and share, great food, great drinks with them. That people connect over the dinner table or around the fire sipping whiskey, so it's just it's nice to know that the thing I'm making is part of the all those little connections between people all over the place.
Somebody from Ohio all the way to a Georgia Southern boar fell in love with your product, so I agree with you on that. So, okay, sitting behind you, you've got some bottles. What's your favorite bottle on that shelf behind you right now? I see some Remus. What's your favorite one back there?
So the repeals are always gonna be some of my favorites, but I'm really I love bourbon, but I'm really more of a rye whiskey guy.
Yep.
And our Rossville Union Barrel Proof is probably like my favorite. It changes, by the day. Sometimes I come home and I feel like one of the repeals. Sometimes I feel like the Gatsby, but the more often than not, it's our Rossville Union Barrel Proof.
So when I first started this whole thing into bourbon, I thought mistakenly that I wasn't a rye person, and then I realized I just wasn't having the right ryes. Now I have a dedicated rye shelf, and I've fallen in love with so many different ryes. So I would encourage everybody to explore and figure out what your palates are. All right, so last question I got for you, and then I'll give you the floor for final thoughts. As everybody knows on this channel, at least, this Gatsby Reserve, I got the 2022 version here, one of my favorite bottles of all time. Now, listen, Ian, on our live shows, I do like a little bourbon news section, and I happened to come across an article September 25th that the 2023 is about to come out. Your name's all over it. Now, unfortunately, it has two words that terrify me: ultra limited release.
Oh, yeah.
So, any advice you can give me on how I can maybe potentially procure that bottle, since this is one of my favorites? Any tips on where to go and when it's going to hit the shelves for people to start looking for
Um, Not really.
it? Just best of luck.
It's ultra limited, but last year's was ultra limited too. So if you got one last year, you will likely be able to get one this year. Um, Start looking for it in the next few weeks. It's hard because it hits different markets at different times. We send it out to the distributors, but then different distributors in different states hold on to it longer or shorter, and when it gets to retail in different parts of the country is always just hard to pin down.
I agree.
But
Georgia, for whatever reason, Georgia seems to get things last. I don't know how, but I always see all my friends, oh, I got this, and I'm like, I can't find it anywhere. And then by the time it gets to Georgia, it just sits here. So I'll be on the lookout for it for sure. This is one of my all-time
yeah.
favorite bottles. Have you like comparing this to the 2023? What are your thoughts? 2022 or 2023? Which one do you like better?
Um, I would say it's a toss up, really. Um, I liked this year's repeal 7 better than the previous years of 6, pretty consistently. But when I blind the two Gatsbys together, I'm not real consistent on which one I like better.
No
They're
kidding. Okay.
yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, I thought that the Repeal 5 was my favorite and 3 won in a blind. And everybody uh, thought the 6 was their least favorite. And I didn't think it was as bad. I did that one in a blind recently too. And I don't have the 7 yet. And the 6 was pretty
Yeah,
good.
if people aren't doing blinds, then it's hard to take what they're saying seriously because you just come in with all these biases, especially like if you really liked, like you really liked five, right?
Yep.
And then for one, some people are comparing to what they remember it tasted like, which is
Yep.
just crazy because we always look at the past with rose-colored glasses anyway.
Yes.
And trying to say, hey, this whiskey versus one I had 2 years ago is impossible for anyone to do.
Yeah.
That's just nuts. Um, but then also, like, even if we're comparing them side by side, if we were like, oh, well, five was my favorite, and we go into it thinking that, like, that's what it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So you have to do it blind, otherwise it just really doesn't mean anything. And it was interesting because six, I think, kind of suffered from five. Five was so many people's like favorite whiskey of the year in 2021 that they didn't blind them and they just were like had these like rose-colored glasses to five but then a lot of times when they went back and blinded them, some of them picked six over five. So you never know. And then in like the big blind tasting competitions like the ASCOT Awards, we tied for second in the ASCOT Awards with six, so in the straight bourbon category. So it did really well in the blind tastings. It didn't do as well in the non-blind tastings.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think I've said this on the show. Blinds are they tell all. They're the truth tellers.
Mhm.
And my 6 had dust on it. I thoroughly love the Remus journey, and like you said, there were so many people that were like, it's not as good as 5, and I never went to it. And on the last show, I said, I really regret this sitting on the shelf that long. I think it's not bad at all. So. Anyways, Ian, I really appreciate your time. Tell people where they can find you. Do you have any socials you want people to follow you on? Is that even a thing you do? I'll give the floor to you for the last couple seconds if you want to tell people where they can find you and keep up with your projects. And maybe if there's something, can you give us a hint at something coming soon that maybe people don't know about?
Yeah. So you can follow us on, we have Remus Bourbon Instagram and Facebook. We have Ross and Squibb Instagram and Facebook. We have a Rossville Union Instagram and Facebook. So we're out there on all those socials. You can follow us. Um, and as far as new things come out, in most markets, you may have seen the press release for this already, but in most markets, it's not out yet. We have a bottled and bond Rossville Union coming out,
Okay.
which is something that is pretty cool. It's an entirely different mash bill. So, at our distillery, we make, 75% of the rye whiskey on the market. Nobody makes nearly as much rye whiskey as we do. But this is a pretty new mash bill. So what people know from us is really that 95% rye, 5% malted barley mash bill. That's the one that is the most famous. But this new bottled and bond is 51% rye, 49% malted barley. So it's way different than any other rye whiskey you've ever tasted. So that's new and exciting. Our Remus Highest Rye is out in most markets now, but a lot of people still haven't heard of it. So that one is exciting. It's a new mash bill for us too. It's 51% corn, 39% rye, and 10% malted rye. So it's a combined 49% rye.
Okay.
We kind of pioneered high rye bourbon from way back in the Seagram's days. And so we wanted to make a bourbon that's the highest rye a bourbon can be, and it turned out really, really good. So that's exciting. And then, we have some other cool new innovations coming out, but can't quite talk about them yet.
All
So
right, fair
you'll have to
enough.
wait for those.
I tried,
Yeah.
guys. You've got me in the mood to try some ryes as soon as we disconnect this call. So I think I may go grab some and explore a little bit more. Ian, thank you so much for being here. I'm a huge fan. And by the way, I don't know if that's a common thing that you do, but commenting on like content creators, YouTube channels, especially as small as we were, is such a great thing. Everybody behind the scenes talks about it. I've told this story probably 1,000 times. Ian commented on one of my videos. So I promise you, behind the scenes, we love it. I would highly recommend that you guys keep doing that. It really brightens our day and gives us huge smiles. So I can't thank you enough for joining, and thank you for commenting and at least seeing that video. I really appreciate it, Ian.
All right, awesome. Well, I appreciate you having me on, Matt. It was,
Absolutely. All
it's
right.
fun talking to you.
All right. Cheers, Ian.